As far as we were concerned, they were all just blues singers, and we didn't pay them no mind. They didn't mean anything at all to us, because we heard that all day and night. It wasn't anything special to us. It's a hard way to make an easy living. For I'd schemed and used up all my bag of tricks to get that date. Had greased my neck with goose grease every morning, so it'd become easy to bow and scrape to some recording managers. But none of them would listen to my tale of woe, even though I displayed my teeth to them with a perpetual, lasting watermelon grin.
Chrissy was at the microphone. She might have been the best singer I'd ever heard. I hated following her. A musician, no longer with us, set me straight when I was fairly drunk and going on and on about how nervous I was standing next to all that talent. They were all better than I was sure of it. He sat there, calmly listening, stoned to the bone with a joint sticking out of his mouth. When I got done ranting, he exhaled the thick smoke and spoke way too slow.
You do what you do. Nobody else can do what you do. You can't do what anybody else do. So what's the matter with you?
Nothing. Sorry I blew up. As usual, AC had finished with her big gospel number and wiped the sweat from her oversized face. It must have been 100 degrees on stage. The people on the dance floor were drenched. The audience was on their feet. Everyone was screaming for more. Roy, the bartender / master of ceremonies, was shouting into the microphone. His evangelistic tone gave what he was saying more reverence than any other MCs we usually ran into. As I made my way to the bar, I heard Roy scream our name for the 5th time. The show was over. We had just finished playing at the Trowel Tavern. It was the night before our road trip. Usually Thursdays, or for that matter, any weekend was slow, but this particular night was different. I loved playing the room. My loving to play the Trowel had more to do with how we were treated rather than it being conducive for live sound. Actually, the Trowel was bad acoustically because it was long and narrow. And since the walls were brick, getting a good sound was even more of a challenge. What you played, you got to hear 2 or 3 times before the next note was struck, which made for a huge roar. The stage was on the short end of the room, which doubled the previous problem. Directly above the stage was a huge oil painting of Jimi Hendrix done in swirly, multicolored lines. Whoever painted it was too high for too long on something. We only knew it was Hendrix because it had the words Electric Ladyland written underneath the painting in the same swirly motion. The interior decorator must have been a midget because the bar had small circular tables barely large enough to hold the pitchers of beer and foam-filled glasses that were always spilling. The tables had matching wobbly chairs, all of which were smashed together, chaos to an already crowded room. The beer-staled air was heavy with smoke so thick you could barely see the ashtray. It was home to me. Just about any bar was. I loved how bars smelled and looked. At the end of the night, watching the waitresses clearing the nightly despair off the tables was a comforting sight, and the clinking of glass as the bartenders restocked the bar was music to my aching bones. My favorite perch at the end of most nights would be on a bar stool, one elbow propped up so I could lean my head on my hand. The other hand would be busy with a cigarette or lifting whatever free booze was given to me at the end of the evening. Hopefully, that would be whiskey. I expected special perks because, after all, I was the star. The Trowel was the only club in Seattle where there were honest-to-goodness blues fans. They came to listen and to dance. The place legally held 80 people, but night after night we would perform for 140 sweaty, squished, blues-loving sardines. It was music at its best. Nat and Roy owned the place and supported their local musicians in any way they could. Financially, spiritually, or being your friend, they were there for us. The two of them looked like a blues version of Laurel and Hardy. Nat was long in the face, tall and thin. Everything about Roy was round, glasses, body, and face. When they stood side by side, they made the number 10. Nat's hair was perfectly in place, sandy colored with a precision cut. He wore a suit every night, a deep blue suit. Nat's shoulders were broad and his body so thin you could see what he was thinking. The deep blue suit seemed as if it were draped on a human hanger. He treated the blues with class, with respect. It was another reflection of his gentlemanly ways. Nat had old-fashioned manners. His gaunt face had barely enough room to support a mustache that had been neatly trimmed. His gold loop earring hanging off his right ear was the only sign that he might not be a banker. Nat's eyes cared when you spoke to him. His body cared. He leaned into the conversation by propping his chin up on his hands and digging in for a listen. I always told Nat the truth because he cared so much. Nat was the listener. Roy was the talker, the entertainer. Roy had ordained himself as a minister of the blues. Roy always had a story brewing. He stuck his thumbs in his belt, leaned back on his heels, and started rocking back and forth, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe. Like one of those big blow-up plastic clowns with big feet, Roy's stomach centered him so he couldn't rock too far in either direction. As usual, Roy was taking on the tone of tent reviving evangelist. The boy could preach. Usually about some Delta blues player. What it was like to see Son House live in 1969. Roy took a deep breath. He knew, as we all did, he was entering sacred territory.
One night, we went to one of those Saturday night fish fries and Son House was playing. Muddy Waters was there. That's when he was using the bottleneck because most of the Delta people use this bottleneck style thing. Muddy has been known to say that when he heard Son House, he should have broken his bottleneck. Son House played this place for about 4 weeks, and I was there every night. You couldn't get me out of that corner listening to him. What he was doing, that guy could preach the blues just by sitting down there and sing one thing after another like a man of the cloth. That show was the best I'd ever seen. Lord, the son must have been 90 years old then. He'd been sitting on a chair all bent over with an old weathered guitar on his lap, drawing some ancestral spiritual strength. Then he would lift his head and start to sing, and this kind of singing you could only hear in the cotton fields 100 years ago. The kind of singing that is sure there ain't no way out. There ain't no other way than doing what they doing. Yes, Lord, and that'd be picking cotton. Oh, I got the blues, 'cause I'm gonna do is pick the cotton for the man. Make no mistake, Mr. Preacher Man, the blues is the music of the Lord. Oh, yes, indeed. Let us not make that mistake. The kind of singing that can be only sung by a man who's gone blind with music. May I get an amen?
We were too stunned to say amen, but Roy didn't mind. He had his story to continue.
And them hands, those powerful hands, those same hands that plowed the fields and picked the thorny cotton off the vine, were the same hands clutching at cords from steel strings that were waiting to be ripped from the wood of the guitar.
Roy unhooked one of his thumbs so that he could wrap his fat hand around a shot glass full of Old Crow bourbon. He was just getting started. He had our attention. Lucy was forgetting to take a drag off the cigarette she was holding. Nina was forgetting to flirt with the new janitor, and Paula was forgetting not to cry. I knew we were all thinking the same thing. If we could have just been there, seen it for ourselves, added to the experience of the music we were playing every night. Roy lit a cigarette. He had been fortified, so it was time to continue.
Brothers and sisters, please open your Bibles to Psalm 78. We will now read from the Maskil of Asaph. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things, things from the old, what we have heard and know, what our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he had done. Can I get an amen?
We smiled while Roy ranted and continued.
The power of Son's presence and voice pinned us against our seats. The sweat was pouring down his face. He was what he sang. There weren't no separating the two. The Son's black body glistening from his sweat, becoming a mirror for the lights. He was sitting on the stage, but his spirit was living down south in the cotton field. As in the words of Booker White, you want to know where the blues come from? The blues came from behind the mule. Well now, you can have the blues sitting at the table eating. But the foundation of the blues is walking behind a mule way back in slavery time. You see, that's what the brother's son knew.
Roy took another drink.
When Son would finish wailing, he would collapse exhausted. Then he'd be hunched over for 2 or 3 minutes, absolutely still. And then he'd slowly rise up, pulling on the same spiritual chord and doing it all over again. He would put himself through the same blues initiation, song after song after song. 2 soul-filled hours of the main man. Lord, I will never forget Son House. Let us pray for the still suffering.
We sat in quiet awe. We were converts. Roy had preached us the Delta Blues.
Well, preacher, I remember when I saw William Turk. He had a left hand like God. He didn't know what key he was playing in, but he would play them all. He could play the ragtime stride bass, but it bothered him because his stomach got in the way of his arm. So he used a walking bass instead. I can remember when I was 13. This was in 1896, how Turk would play one note with his right hand and at the same time 4 with his left. We called it 16. They call it boogie woogie now. That was God for sure, hearing him play like that.
Lenny was listening to the preaching along with me, his hands tapping at lightning speed on his outer thighs as he stood there until he began pacing again. A gift, being able to move those fat, hairy hands like God had intended it himself. Lenny had played keyboards in my bands over the last 10 years. As usual, he was wound up at the end of the night. The only way I could tell was by the way he wandered around the club after we finished playing. I watched him as he paced. His clothes were soaked through. The thin cotton shirt had become transparent. The massive chest hair that wasn't matted underneath his shirt was left to escape from the V-shaped neckline. A chest like Lenny's is what the V was designed for. Hairy, curly, and wet. A big hairy ape with a partially bald head and a crucifix hanging from one ear. A cotton bandana tied around the top of his head was soaking up the sweat so it wouldn't run down into his eyes. What hair Lenny had left was hanging out of the bottom of the drenched scarf. Lenny was 6 feet tall, had big shoulders, and a beard that wasn't trimmed, because that would have been sissy. Lenny smelled like a locker room. The bar smelled like a locker room. The musty smell was something I had grown used to over the last 20 years. I hardly noticed it anymore. I even looked forward to it a little. Lenny always intimidated me the way he perspired, the way he talked in short, gruff tones.
Hey, you up for partying tonight? Chrissy, Lucy, Vinny, and I think Sam are coming.
I wanted to go home more than anything. But what did what I wanted to do have to do with anything? I began to think of go home after the gig allies.
Sam probably won't come. He'll be too tired from beating those drums all night in this heat. He'll probably go home and look at those baseball mitts he's got hanging on the wall. Jesus, how hot is it anyway?
Too fucking hot. That's how hot it is. Shit, I'm just telling you what he told me. He'd probably stop by.
I leaned on the sticky bar waiting for Lenny to finish slamming down a beer 10 minutes after last call. Thank God I had stashed whiskey in my purse. I hated the fact that the trowel wouldn't serve me hard liquor after closing. Roy said beer was better for me. He didn't like how I got after 3, 4 shots. The last time I drank hard liquor in the trowel, I wouldn't leave. They had to call my then boyfriend to come and get me. I lost a pair of $150 shoes that night. I think I threw them at Mr. Boyfriend. I never did trust the waitress afterwards. I was positive she was a shoe thief. Anyway, I was mildly irritated with Roy because I hated beer. After all, it was just some piss water with a little alcohol thrown in for fun. I couldn't drink enough brewski to take me where the whiskey could in just 4 straight shots. If you added a couple of lines, I was in a religious state of mind. I had the answer to all things and very sure that everything said by me was really quite special. Lenny was waiting for an answer, and I was avoiding one.
Lenny, I've been meaning to ask you something. You know, I've hung out with you for a long time, and you never seem to get drunk. I mean, you always act normal. 10 lines, 10 beers, and you're still the same gruff, horny, aloof motherfucker you always are.
Lenny took this as a compliment. He smiled.
It's a prison thing.
I don't think so. You acted like this before you ever went to prison. I think it's from all those years you played with Sly Stone. I know that was one crazy dude.
No shit.
Lenny didn't like most people. No matter how long you knew Lenny, you still had to go through his gruff initiation each time you saw him. Even if you were somebody he liked, he'd stand with his hairy arms folded, not smiling, looking you straight in the eye, watching the tenuous approach, waiting you out to say something. He was born with the characteristic of being able to puff himself up like a cat who had just run into a strange dog. I would test how long he and I could stand there without speaking a word. I would give in after a couple of minutes, using one of his favorite words. "Hey," I would say. In a low, rough voice, he would answer back.
Hey.
His favorite word was shit. Though I always tried to ignore it, it was impossible not to be aware of its existence, his emotional labyrinth. I knew underneath all of his prison, don't fuck with me or I'll fuck with you, I'm hard to get to attitude, he was absolute mush. Lenny's voice was interrupting my private list of his personality defects.
Hey, you didn't fucking answer me. Are you coming over?
I shouldn't.
You're a fucking wimp.
Fuck you, Lenny. You're the wimp. You're the one that grew up in a white, middle-class family in Minnesota, for God's sake. That must be embarrassing for a tough guy like you. I mean, I'm the one that grew up in the inner city of Detroit. You're the fucking wimp. As soon as I find my fucking gun, I'll shoot your wimpy ass.
Shit, you are nasty tonight. What's your fucking problem?
I had hit a nerve. Lenny was an only child and got everything he wanted. In other words, he was a spoiled brat. The communication gyrations he put us through were a result of his only child's spoiled history. I'm sure that Lenny thought that nobody would take his funky, soulful, bluesy playing seriously if they knew his background was normal. So Lenny's rebellious adult years had been spent being anything but normal. Any mention of his childhood was off limits, but I was losing ground in the willpower area, and out of frustration of losing the private battle in my head, I was pulling out the big guns on Lenny. Besides his rebel nature, there were 2 more things that made Lenny perfect for the show. He could play well, and he loved women. Music and women were very important to him. And man, did the women like him. He was so sexy that you could smell it on him. He thought about it a lot. Whatever he was talking about, I just knew it would be a matter of time and sex would be the next topic. He always got around to it, how he wanted to do this woman and that woman. The keeper of the keys had no morals except when it came to us. He left all of the women alone, though I knew he fantasized. Nina had thrown herself at him several times, but Lenny knew that would be one complicated lay. To Nina, a toss in the hay meant a potential relationship. To Lenny, it meant moving on to the next complete stranger. He was always on the prowl. When the good-looking ones walked by, Lenny would stare, gradually soaking them in through his pores. His eyes would get dreamy as he made eye contact. Then he would speak.
Hey.
He played keyboards like a drummer. percussive. Both his hands were fast, the left as fast as the right. Chick Corea meets Leon Russell meets James Brown. Funky and fast, Lenny would pound away and create a wall of sound as the sweat rolled down his face, drenching his hair with perspiration, turning each strand into a wet ringlet. Though I was the band leader, I let Lenny run the show, maybe more than I should have. He was a father figure of sorts, and I didn't want to upset him. My own emotional needs were very bound up with my father, so saying no to Lenny when I meant no seemed impossible. Lenny turned his sights on AC.
Hey, you coming over tonight?
AC was always under Lenny's spell. Why, Lenny? What's going on?
Nothing. Just hanging out, drinking beer, maybe playing some cards.
As much as AC adored Lenny, she was more afraid of her father and not being at the restaurant in the morning to help him open it. It was a struggle, though, because she was always on call to try and steal anybody's loyalties from me so that she could be the gal in charge. No, I better not. I got to get up early. If the two of us could only please our dear old dad. She shot me a bossy stare. You better not be late. I'm tired of covering for you. Bitch. She'll never be in charge. Contortions were something I had become good at when it came to my feelings. I lived under the self-imposed tyranny of oughts and shoulds over my real needs, which only led to resentment and anger at Lenny. I would hide behind the face of a civilized and reasonable person while hiding the fact of how angry I was at him because we didn't agree on most things. In my mind, the most important disagreement was how the blues should be played. I thought the simpler the better. He thought the blues should always have an element of funk to it. I loved big open spaces in between notes while Lenny was jamming as many notes as possible into those spaces. But like I said, I didn't hold my musical ground because that would have upset Lenny's piano cart.
Hey, I'm talking to you.
What? Oh yeah, I'll probably be there, but I can't stay for long.
My cousin Robbie will be there. He has his eye on you.
God, that guy's a pig. I mean, why doesn't he get laid and leave the rest of womankind alone?
Why don't you screw him? It shouldn't be no problem the way you get after a couple of drinks.
Why don't you piss off? Anyway, it takes one to know one.
Shit, baby, I'm proud of it.
Lenny, stop. I don't like when you talk to me like that.
What the fuck is your problem? You're sensitive tonight. Jesus, I'm not telling you nothing you don't already know.
Yeah, well, I've never screwed my girlfriend's sister. I do have guidelines. I wouldn't trust you in a room with my mother.
How old's your mother?
Drop dead.
In my heart, I knew I was pretty much of a slut. If I drank, I screwed, plain and simple. It was one of those symptoms of my blackouts. I didn't like it much. As a matter of fact, being with strangers disgusted me, but the booze helped to numb me to whatever it was that disgusted me.
I don't want to talk to you anymore. Besides, I got to get the money.
As I turned to get away from Lenny, I slammed into AC. She had a knack of mysteriously appearing when it was time for the money. AC had the ever-present perturbed look on her face. Eyes narrowed, smearing of late-night mascara, head tilted back, arms crossed, which only widened the already too familiar feeling that she just wasn't a part of this madness. I mean, she had plenty else to do than sing with us. It wasn't enough AC disapproved of my behavior, but she had to let me know how much she disapproved. At that time of night, I was past the point of giving a flying fuck about her opinion. But there were times when it did matter, and she knew it. Do you have the money? I looked up and smiled.
Hey, AC baby, what's going on?
She drawled slowly. Just wondering about the cash.
I'm on my way.
AC didn't care. Yeah? But don't take all night. I gotta get going. I have a long way to drive.
No problem.
It was AC's not-so-roundabout way of telling me real nice to not sit and drink and do drugs while the entire band waited to get their money. Tonight, I would do as I was told. Though Roy and Nat had equal share in the bar, they definitely had who did what when worked out. Roy was always too drunk to be trusted with money, so Nat paid me. We had done well, with each player making $120 for the evening's work. We were used to $50 nights everywhere else in town. Nat didn't look right. He looked more drawn than usual. I was about to ask him what was wrong, but didn't get a chance because that's when the bomb dropped.
I want to talk to you about something.
Yeah, no problem. What's going on?
I've been trying to find a way to tell you, but I'll come right out and say it. Roy and I are selling the place.
What are you talking about? You can't do this. I love playing here. I mean, this is my major hang. What the fuck is going on? I mean, everybody loves playing here.
I realized quickly that the more I complained, the more destroyed Nat looked. I squeaked out one more word.
Why?
Nat thought for a while. I was sure he was searching for the right thing to say.
It's too much for me. I need to make some money. I got a family to raise. I need to get on with my life.
His thin face was growing so tense I thought it might close in on itself. For the first time that evening, I could see how tired Nat was. I had never considered these guys weren't making a living because I was so busy struggling myself. Of course, I didn't think any of their reasons for closing were as important as mine were for the trial to stay open. It was more than just a gig to me. I could always find a place to play. But the blues was my family. The trial, a place to get together with family members and share the passion of it all. When a place like that closed, it was the same as a death in the family. There weren't too many clubs left that any of us liked to play anymore. We were all getting too old for the bullshit most clubs dished out. And me, well, my reasoning was just a little more self-serving. As much as I drank, I needed to be in a user-friendly environment. Places where people were willing to make excuses for my drunken behavior. I was running out of welcoming mats. The two watering holes I could count on were the trowel and Jerry's blueback. Well, at least at Jerry's, they gave me all the whiskey I wanted if I had a little blow to trade. Financially, it was a bad deal for me. But when I wanted a drink, money was the least of my worries. I made another selfish plea.
Please, Nat, think about this before you do it. This is the Blues headquarters. This is where we all hang. Where are we going to hold the Blues Awards? I mean, Roy's the editor of the newsletter. I mean, where's all this going to end up?
God, Lena, you're making this even harder. I can't worry about this shit anymore. I've got to get back to the rest of my life.
I had no idea what the hell Nat was talking about. This was his life. I still had some hope.
Who are the new owners? Will they keep it as a blues club?
Nat hesitated. I could tell the answer was shit.
I don't think so. I mean, no, it won't be. They're going to turn it into an Irish pub.
Are you fucking serious? Don't the Irish have enough places to drink? Hell, they can drink in their cars. Jesus, what the hell do we need another Irish pub for?
Half my family was Irish. I knew we could drink in our living room, so we certainly didn't need a pub to go to. Roy joined us again. He had been cleaning up the bar, restocking it. The preacher had a fresh import beer in his hand and looked down in the dumps.
We won't be making any sudden decisions, but, man, we both have other things to do.
I can't imagine what you'll be happy doing other than being involved with the blues. I know you have that teaching degree, and on bad nights you actually threaten to use it, but I just can't see you in a classroom. And I don't think you can see yourself doing that job either.
I always thought that degree just provided him with some false sense of security, never thinking the preacher of the Delta Blues would actually use the damn thing.
I'm running out of money. I gotta get a real job. The club just ain't paying the bills anymore.
There was no doubt in my gut. There had been a death in the family.
Yeah, all right, whatever. Well, thanks for the gig. It was great tonight. You guys give me a call about bookings. Let me know what's happening, because I count on the job.
I couldn't believe it. What a drag. This would be a good reason to fuel the drinking tonight. Not that I needed a good reason. Any reason was reason enough. It was time to move the equipment out. Everyone but Chrissy and Lucy pitched in. It was the one time that they knew not to have a fight in the bar when we were loading out. Those two sure did know how to be in cahoots for a duo that did all the late night fighting. I don't know how they did it, but they would be around to the very last minute they could get a drink, and then the next minute vanish. If Houdini were alive, he could have learned a thing or two from those dames. All of us mumbled under our breath about it. It was part of the ritual. They disappeared, and we complained about it. Just then, Nat and Roy came running. Maybe the club wasn't going to close. Maybe it was some kind of weird 5-minute drunken hallucination. Nat, with his kind eyes reaching for me, gave me a big hug. Roy, out of breath, holding something behind his back. He was a little wobbly, but managing it since he did have wobbling down to a science.
I wanted you to have the sign.
I'm thinking, is something going to give me the finger? Peace sign?
What sign?
With that, Roy and Nat handed me the owl sign, written in script that sat above the chipped mirror behind the bar. The sign that shone like a red beacon at 3 a.m, showing me the way back from my sea of whatever I had managed to drink.
Wow, you guys, thanks. It means a lot to me.
Then I heard myself say,
I love you.
They both looked at the ground. Neither knew what to say. I couldn't take the silence.
Well, if you want to stand there, fine, but you could help load up the vans.
They mumbled.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
I wrapped up my sign with the dirty beach towel that we used when spilling our drinks in the van. Then I set my light in my lap as I sat in the front seat. The light that could show me the way from the smoke-soaked memories. An end to something that wasn't as familiar as it was 5 minutes ago. By the time Lenny and Vinny, the bass player, were getting ready to pull away from the bar, my watch read 2:30. The women had already left. They were all having a sensible moment and knew they should get some sleep. Lenny walked up to the window.
Hey, you coming over for a few drinks?
The party was always at Lenny's house.
Listen, Lenny, we shouldn't, man. We have to get up early tomorrow morning. We've got long couple of weeks ahead of us. 9 a.m. means I have to get up at 7, and I still need to pack. It's a half-hour drive over to your house. If I don't go home right after the gig, I'm going to be fucking hurting.
Shit. And your point?
He wasn't buying, but I wasn't selling with any real conviction, and Lenny knew it.
Oh, shit. Don't give me your shit excuses. You're a trooper. I'll see you at my place.
I don't know how I went from wimp to trooper, but I liked the sound of trooper a lot better. Oh, hell, now I couldn't turn him down. Besides, I would do just about anything to keep old Lenny happy. I figured I would stay for an hour.
Yeah, Lenny, I'll see you there.
Lenny smiled.
Hey.
Fuck it. By the time I walked into Lenny's house, it was 3 a.m. My state of mind was altered, and logical thinking was no longer part of my mental process as I slowly slid down the muddy slide of Partyland. Lenny's house was the stereotype of a musician's bachelor pad. It was as if Lenny had followed some standard blueprint. Stereo gear stacked from floor to ceiling on shiny black steel shelving. Everything Lenny bought was black. His house looked like Darth Vader had something to do with the decorating. The black leather couches were scooped around in a half circle, so the huge television was the main focal point of the room. Comedy and music videos were stacked all around the monster screen. He would pull any one of these out when the conversation got redundant, which was soon and often. Usually it took about an hour after the party started. Tonight we broke some kind of record. The TV went on within 15 minutes of the first arrival. Chick Corea's hands were flying across the big screen. The rhythm section was burning it up behind him. I didn't know who the others were, though I always pretended that I did. Lenny and my bass player Vinny had their eyes glued to the screen. Both of them were studying every move that was being made by musicians they hoped to play with someday, or at least take a lesson from. Lenny looked up briefly and mumbled.
Hey.
I answered with his word.
Hey.
Lenny ignored my sarcasm.
Why don't you grab a beer out of the fridge? They're cold.
No, thanks. I brought my own.
Lenny eyed my bottle of whiskey as I pulled it out of my purse.
You gonna share any of that?
It hadn't crossed my mind.
I looked down at the lines that Lenny had drawn perfectly onto a mirror with his driver's license. He could have gotten busted for what was stuck in between the plastic alone. If I wanted any blow, I would have to share my booze. That is one of the things I hate about life. Everything is a trade-off. I reconsidered my answer.
I was just kidding. Yeah, you can have some. You want a glass?
What for? Just screw off the top and throw it out. We won't be using it.
Lenny, I can only stay for an hour.
Yeah, right. Where are the rest of the women? They said they were coming over.
They went home because they're all smarter than me.
Shit, you're a fucking trooper.
There was that word again. I sat down on the black long-shagged carpet, smack in front of the coffee table. The get-together was always the same. A few beers, a few drinks, a few lines. Let's not forget everyone talking too fast and nobody listening. Vinny drifted off to talk bass language with another bass player who had just shown up. Most of the words they were speaking had a thump to them. Lenny was getting high. He started to ignore me. I talked myself into being alone. Why not? I mean, they had heard it all before. Even though I was getting drunk, I knew I was getting boring. But being aware had nothing to do with me being able to stop. I just knew that I wasn't the most interesting person once I had done some lines and been drinking whiskey. My brain shrank, which was a trigger for my ego to go haywire. I became a fast-talking bore with nothing to say. Lenny had the cure, though. Lenny's higher power was television. I remember once complaining to him about how painful growing up and being responsible was. I whined,
I don't want to grow anymore. Jesus, enough. How do I stop it? I want to stay right where I am.
Lenny thought for a moment and said,
Hey, television works for me. Now that's the shit.
I looked at my watch. It was 3:30. Time sure does fly when you're trying to stop it. Vinny was leaning over the table, sucking up anything that was in the rolled-up dollar bills line of fire. We were trying to act normal with each other since we had slept together about a week before. I had to admit I was having a hard time justifying that drunken escapade. He was like a brother to me, but the booze didn't care about incestuous feelings because it was too busy caring about the needy ones. Of course, the more normal Vinny and I tried to act with each other, the weirder it got. I knew in time things between us would be okay, but it wasn't helping the immediate moment. I watched Vinny snorting up the white powder. His nose was screwed up from the piles of blow he had been doing, and he could barely get any of it up his swollen nostrils. Vinny sat back and snorted some beer off his black, shiny fingertips, willing to try anything to get the cocaine up where it belonged. I watched and listened to Vinny struggle with his blocked nasal passages. He had on a deep purple velvet sweater and creased black pants that ended right above his $200 shoes. That man loved shoes. Vinny's shoes cost more than I made in a week. He always looked good. His past gave him an edge, and anything could set Vinny off. He was not easy to get along with. The man lived to argue, cocky and temperamental. For example, if the stage wasn't set up just right, that gave Vinny permission to blow the first set. Of course, the uncertainty of his behavior got old. Mr. Swollen Nostrils was under the same illusion that a lot of people are. If you think it, then you must be right. Wrong. As cool as Lenny stayed behind alcohol and drugs, Vinny was his polar opposite. He could not maintain. If he had the slightest buzz, he was unable to do anything. We called him Elvis when he was too high. His upper lip would curve up in a permanent sneer, hence Elvis. He couldn't talk, only sneer. There he'd be with a crusty nose, beer in one hand, cigarette in the other, and a permanent sneer. A poster child for toxic shock. I looked over at Vinny. His upper lip was now locked into sneer mode. From here on in, Vinny would only be able to get out partial sentences. He would talk in sections. But no matter what was going on in Vinny's personal life, he was always the funkiest bass player I ever played with. He could find the stand back, I'm gonna kiss myself, too hot in the hot tub, I'm a bad motherfucker hump in the beat. Bass has its own language. Few people speak it. Vinny spoke bass fluently through his hands. His fingers were graceful, beautiful. They glided across the neck of the bass. I loved watching him play. He didn't move a muscle, just his hands barely moving, popping the strings. Most of the bass players I had previously hired thought of the bass as an instrument that they mistakenly played as a frustrated lead guitarist, filling the spaces with busy notes, forgetting to keep time, but not Funky Vinny. He understood bass as an ensemble instrument. He created bottom and melody. The sound of his bass would force you to tap your foot and hum along at the same time. Oh, the sound! What a sound! You could feel the vibration of Vinny's bass in your groin, deep, warm, vibrating tones. Hardly any treble on that baby, though, just enough to clean up the rumble. It wasn't enough that you were going to hear the bass or tap your foot to it. No, you had to wear it on the inside of your gut. Vinny Small had music pumping through his bass string veins, and why the hell did I sleep with him? Throughout the drinking and drug fest, carefully disguised as a party, I kept looking at my watch. Let's see now, if I get 4 hours of sleep, I'll feel pretty good. I just need one more drink, and then I'll leave. The whiskey was trickling down my throat. God, the chill going down my spine was incredible. The sensation of warm medicine healing all that was wrong erased the gray, cold world, turning it into a warm and rose-colored place. Yeah, everything was cool. Vinny and I were buds. No problem, man. Oh, hell, I don't need 4 hours of sleep. I've done just as well on 3. Yeah, another line sounds great. I looked up, and there was Lenny's cousin Robbie. His jeans were so tight he could barely sit down on the floor. The white cotton dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, I guess, so we could all get a better look at the gold chain hanging from his neck. I wondered how he could wear the big silver belt buckle without it cutting into his stomach that hung over it. The silver eagle must at least leave an imprint by the end of the day. I couldn't stand guys that looked like him. Shiny cowboy boots you could see yourself in, a mustache that set too far above his upper lip, giving him a sinister look. But what made it all worse was that Robbie had a thing for me which pissed me off. Where did he get off? I would be interested in a guy like him. Fuck, I had morals. He was oblivious to my disgust for him.
Nice to see you here, Lena. You look good.
Fuck you. I look like shit. I sang all night and I've been drinking and it's past my fucking bedtime.
Well, I like how you look. I brought some Old Crow. Looks like you're running a bit low.
Lenny drank most of it.
Robbie laughed. I thought he didn't look too bad when he laughed. His teeth were real nice. But I don't know. His hair was all slicked back and the cheap cologne kept sneaking up my stuffed nose. He must have had a lot of that shit on. Robbie poured me another drink. Maybe I was being too hard on the guy. He wasn't that bad. I looked down at my watch. I couldn't believe I'd actually thought I'd need 3 hours of sleep. 2 is more than any healthy human really needs.
I've always had a thing for you, Lena.
Oh, that's too bad for you.
Why do you treat me so rotten? I haven't done anything to you.
Well, I don't trust you.
Why not?
Because you're too clean. It makes you kind of sinister.
I can dirty it up for you, baby.
Fuck you.
I see your glass is empty. Why don't you hang on to the bottle? You're the one here that really likes the bourbon.
I gave Robbie another good look. He was a bit fuzzier, which helped. I had to admit, he had nice skin. I opened my eyes to a tired alarm. The buzzer had rung for an hour. I couldn't move my head. Where was I? I slowly looked around and realized I was in my own bed, which was a relief. Lately, I hadn't been making it home. I was ending up in strange beds or on dirty couches. Finding myself in my own bed was an improvement. All my clothes were off. I never take my clothes off when I'm drunk. I usually just pass out in them. Where were my clothes? That's when I realized someone was laying next to me. Oh, no. Who is this? Please, God, don't let it be who I think it is. I pulled down the sheet. It was Robbie. All of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. Why not Vinny? Oh, yeah, Vinny didn't have the old crow. I knew I had crossed some line. First of all, I couldn't stand him. Secondly, I had no recollection of sleeping with this guy. I mean, none. The only way I knew I had had sex was because I couldn't find my clothes and there was a naked guy sleeping next to me. Oh, God, what should I do? I have to wake him up. Oh, I can't. Facing him sober in my apartment was almost too much. Jesus, it was 8 o'clock and I had to be back at Lenny's to load the van at 9. I sat up, which only doubled the pounding in my head. My mouth tasted like the bottom of an ashtray. The rim of my nose was so sore I could barely touch it. That's when I smelled the sex. The sex I couldn't remember had left its deposits on my thighs. Between the fresh smell of sex and the old smell of his cheap cologne, it all went straight down to my empty stomach. I ran for the toilet. Every time I threw up, my head pounded even harder. I'd rather do anything than throw up. The tears were running down my face. The only shred of hope I could hang on to was that at least I was on my bathroom floor. I needed help. My whole body was shaking. The best I could figure, I probably had an hour's sleep. I would have been better off if I had just taken a real long look at the bed. I could hardly stand up. My knees were shaking too badly.
Rob, get up. I gotta get going. Get the fuck up.
What's going on?
Get the fuck out. How dare you? Couldn't you see how drunk I was? I didn't know what I was doing.
Hey, baby, you were great. You know what you were doing. Enough for me.
Get the fuck out.
Oh, don't get mad, baby. Come on over here. Come on, let's pick up where we left off.
Get the fuck out of my fucking apartment.
Damn. What is your problem? I'm going.
He wasn't getting dressed fast enough. My head was pounding so bad that I could hardly keep my eyes open. As soon as he went away, I could start to pretend this never happened. He was almost at the door. There he stood in his wrinkled clothes and disheveled, greasy hair, just looking at me like some lost puppy. I held my breath. He would be gone in 2 minutes.
Can I call you?
No.
Just for the fucking record, honey, you were the one that was all over me.
Leave now.
Robbie was gone. I hated feeling like this. If I got quiet enough, there was a voice screaming out for help. So needless to say, silence was the dreaded enemy. Okay then. So let's go into action. But I couldn't make anything on my body move. Oh man, even a shower sounded painful, the water beating down on my already pounding head. Even though I desperately needed to do anything but experience my own thoughts, I didn't have the time or energy to do anything else but just that. I had to get going. I was running late. I slowly pulled my hair into a ponytail. The hair thing was always a hassle. My hair was shoulder length, dark brown, and I have lots of it. My out-of-control mop does exactly what it wants to do, never considering I have other plans for it. The solution for my hair and how I felt would be my reliable hangover outfit: baseball cap, official Detroit Tigers, jeans, sandals, and baggy shirt. I looked in the mirror. I didn't like what I saw. My eyes were red, white, and blue, the American way. I couldn't face coffee because I would have to make it. I opened the fridge and found the gallon of orange juice I bought a week ago, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. It looked lonely, with just a couple of slices of pizza and a jar of mustard to keep it company. My hands were shaking, but I managed to screw off the top of the orange juice once I set it down on the counter. I guzzled it until I had to breathe. I could feel the sugar levels readjusting in my body. Whew. This was going to be one long fucking day. I stood in the middle of my apartment, which had been built in the 30s. When I first moved to Seattle, I drove around looking for the ghetto. After a couple of hours scouring the city, I realized that I lived in the bad part of town. I certainly did have a different reference point of a bad neighborhood after growing up in Detroit than most people living in the Northwest. My apartment could have had character if I had taken care of it. I stepped over the piles of clothes, trying to ignore the dirty dishes in the sink and the empty pizza boxes stacked at the back door. One of my ex-boyfriends said he knew when we were having pizza any time it was my turn to cook. I poured another glass of orange juice and hit the button on the answer machine. It was my sorry-ass excuse for a boyfriend.
Lena, this is Randy. Where you been? We had a date yesterday. Give me a call when you get in.
I had slept in the day before. The previous night had been another long one at Chrissy's place. Well, I would explain when I got back from the road trip. Maybe if I was lucky, he would have given up by then. But fat chance. The men I picked were as desperate as I was. I usually had to run them off. Next to the answering machine were 2 months' worth of bills. I picked them up and shoved them into my purse. The road would be a good place to take care of some of this. I functioned better out there than I did at home. Going on tour always gave me a great excuse to get away from it all. Everyday life was getting to be more than I could bear. But of course, once I got out on the road, I remembered how it really was out there. A few days out and the romance of it all would be gone. The light in the motel rooms would begin to prey on my loneliness. Once again, I would have to learn to make friends with it just like everything else the road had to offer or not offer. If you didn't play by road rules, then being a secretary or a waitress was waiting for you when you gave up. Not that I had a problem with that career choice. The point is, you are forced to do those jobs while still struggling to make a living as a singer. Taking on those jobs again felt like I was walking backwards. This was all just a little more incentive to walk out the door into the big cruel world. I remembered that most of the gear was in my van, so at least that was one less worry. On my way over to Lenny's, I thought at least Lenny and Vinny would feel as bad as I did. Of course, neither of them would admit it. We all had learned to hang tough. If you complained, someone might hold you accountable for your actions, and the three of us weren't ready for that responsibility. Thinking about the road trip ahead of me seemed unimaginable. For the next 16 days, I would have to share my space, decisions, and stage with and manage 11 other people. I was more than I could manage. I was the band leader, and I couldn't manage to lead myself out of a fucking party the night before. I needed to get grounded and stop the shakes. It would take a few hours. Breakfast would help. I closed the door behind me.